Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Mike Mason, the creative director of Call of Cthulhu, and we talked about which mythos creature is the most powerful. But we talked about it kind of grudgingly. Mike pointed out that ranking mythos creatures is kind of not the point of unknowable horror. I'll jump across to our conversation in just a moment, but first, please subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel, and thanks for watching.
Well, that's a very naughty question. There isn't a magical scale of mythos entities that we can measure these against, because they are unknowable things beyond our comprehension. So therefore, no measure can work. The only measure that we have is there are what you might want to call minions or monsters, and then beings that are beyond that we term as like great old ones or outer gods and cosmic entities. Cosmic entities and monsters are your two measures, because one monster is effectively measured against a human scale. So we have deep ones and ghouls that are effectively human-like in a sense, and then Azathoth, which is the center of the universe, which is a completely different scale of things. So it's very difficult to kind of pitch them up. But I mean, if you're gonna you really want to know if we're going to play top trumps, and I'm going to keep the Azathoth card, because the whole point of Azathoth is he's asleep, and if he wakes up, the universe dies. So I think no matter how big Cthulhu is, or Nyarlathotep or whatever, when they wake up, the universe doesn't end. Azathoth does. So I think he wins, or it wins.
So for somebody who might have just stumbled across this video and hear that there's a game where you have all of these different gods, but you can't rank them, could you explain why is it that Call of Cthulhu doesn't have a clear delineation of power, considering it's a game at the end of the day?
Okay, Call of Cthulhu is a game that very much was inspired by and created out of the fiction that writers, starting with H.P. Lovecraft, but Robert Bloch and Ramsey Campbell and Clark Ashton Smith and so on, wrote about what's become known as the Cthulhu mythos. And so it has a very much a literary, or rather story-based approach to gaming. Each monster has a role in the story that you're playing, but it may be a different role in another story that you play next week or 2 years down the line. So monsters are vehicles for stories, if you look at it this way. They're not just there to eat investigators. At the very base level, a monster exists to eat investigators, to cause trouble and have a fight with potentially. But that's its most basic value in a game. Its true value is what it brings to the story. What does this monster bring, not only in terms of its eating investigators, but also how does it affect the area? What does it do to the locations? What does its existence mean to the story? And that's why it's very difficult to nail that down and give things a very hard outline, because it's meant to be malleable, because it's meant to be malleable for you, the keeper, to make of it what you will.
Here's a bit of a cheeky question for you then. If I get a rule book and I open it up and I say, Mike, look, I've got the stats here. I've put them against each other. I've rolled out the dice. Why I can say that this guy is more powerful because he does more damage. What do you respond to, when someone says that?
Okay, well, no one ever says that to me apart from you. So, another dark star for you rather than a gold one. But if somebody does that and they have a lot of fun, playing, Deathmatch Cthulhu, then great. It is a game, and you can play it in a variety of ways. We make a slow, gritty kind of investigative horror called Call of Cthulhu. We make an action version called Pulp Cthulhu, and so on and so on. If you want to take what we've done and play Deathmatch Cthulhu and get your Cthulhu miniature out against the Hastur miniature out, and literally, have two players bashing at each other in a knockout campaign, then go for it. That if that's what you're finding fun, then great. It's not what we kind of intended, but that doesn't matter. It's your game. You can do with it like you will. But if somebody says that, I mean, that's really the answer. Is that, if that's what you enjoy, great. But if you don't enjoy that, then there's lots of other things you can do with those monsters. And you can create and fashion, a story, a campaign, or a one shot around that. And in fact, in the collection of monsters that we put out called Mythos Monsters, the monsters aren't, the stat bit in the monster descriptions is just a small box. There's all this other text about what it is and where it comes from and what it might want and how it interacts with humans and the kind of mythos blessings it can give to its followers and all that, which are all kind of story ideas, really, which are far more, for me personally, interesting than whether it's got damage 6d10 or whatever it may be.
I was introduced to the mythos through Call of Cthulhu. I actually read a lot of the associated material later, and I found that when I was diving in, I actually discovered that some of the assumptions that I made based on the game didn't quite play out in the books. Specifically, I know that there's a lot of, like, for want of a better word, genealogy, where if you dive into the literature, technically Cthulhu is the child of X and, is siblings with Y. How does that fit in with everything, and how is that answered from a game perspective?
Well, what you have to understand is every author's version of the Cthulhu mythos is different, and they do not interlink. So Lovecraft, in some of his stories, mentions about, I guess you could kind of call it a genealogy of some kind, but it's very, very vague, and it's just some names. There's not even a connection of what the relationship is, just, so on. Other authors have actually done their own version of that. Somebody like Brian Lumley has done a series of books where he's talked about the Cthulhu's family almost, who are Cthulhu's children and what do they do and all this kind of thing. And that's great if you enjoy that kind of thing. That's that thing. Other authors haven't gone down that way and left it more amorphous and more ambiguous. And in a sense, we've trod a kind of a middle road, I guess. In some cases, there does seem to be some, reason for certain kind of Cthulhu entities to be linked in some way. But again, we've been pretty vague about what that linkage is. We say that some humans have thought that these may be related. Now, that doesn't mean that they are. It just means that some humans in the game think they're related. And obviously, as we already know, the mythos is unknowable, so it doesn't matter what humans think because we probably got it wrong anyway. But ultimately, it's down to, I keep coming back to the story, it's down to the story that you want to tell this time. And every story can be different. If you imagine every game of Call of Cthulhu you play with a different group of investigators operates in its own pocket universe. So whatever happens in that one, if the Earth blows up in that one, it doesn't matter because next week you're in a different pocket universe where the Earth didn't blow up and you're telling a different story. Just like watching a load of horror films over a weekend. They don't all interlink. They don't happen on the same planet in the same, reality. They're happening in their own realities, and they make contextual sense in their own reality. And it's the same with, games, really, in a sense. If you want to run a campaign where Horror on the Orient Express and Masks and the Azathoth happen in the same game world with the same group of investigators, because you want to run this really super long, huge campaign, that's great. Most times those exist in different realities, in a sense, if you think of it, that way.
I'm going to push you a little and try and get a little bit more ranking out of you for the sake of, making this video all kinds of appealing to a wide audience. So would it be fair to say that although all of the mythos creatures out there, once you get into the realm of cosmic beings and outside of, the big shark monster and the bigger shark monster, are all a various stage of unknowable. But when you look at something like Cthulhu, who is at least a being who is conceivably under the ocean, compared to, say, Cthulhu, who is like a star, compared to Azathoth, who is the universe. I mean, I don't think you could crash a boat into Cthulhu and send them back to sleep temporarily.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable point, and it kind of goes back to something I said earlier about the kind of classifications. So I mentioned monsters and I mentioned cosmic beings. Now, cosmic beings are divided up, and you'll see it in the Call of Cthulhu books. You know, they tend to be called great old ones or old ones, and outer gods are the two key ones. There are other types like elder gods and things like that, but the two main ones that you're going to meet are outer gods and great old ones. And the clue is in the title. One's got God in the title, one's not. So if it's got God in the title, an outer god, they are, in theory, significantly on a higher level of existence in terms of their capabilities, influence, and power. Whereas great old ones, you know, we read in the original kind of Call of Cthulhu story that, you know, Cthulhu is a high priest of the outer gods. So Cthulhu, if you think of it this way, is kind of like the vicar for Azathoth. Yeah. And so clearly he is of less status in the overarching cosmos, just like the deep ones, who are Cthulhu's minions, aren't as powerful as Cthulhu. So you have this inherent ranking in there that kind of helps you to kind of get your head around it. And that's certainly one way to kind of look at the scales of monsters if you want to kind of think, well, is this monster, what is this monster, where does it fit? Well, is it a god? Is it a kind of is it in between a god and a human? If it's in between a god and a human, then it's either a monster or a great old one, in a sense. The other scale is what I tend to use as a human scale. Is it the same size as a human? If it is, then it's human scale. Therefore, humans have some capability to, and again, I'm just using combat as an example, to engage in combat, and they might win. If it's beyond human scale, so like a Shoggoth the size of a tube train, or a dark young, which is, you know, some giant tree, clearly, instantly, you know they're going to be more powerful because they're bigger. It's like saying, well, there's me and a dog, which, you know, human can, you know, comparable size depending on the breed of the dog. You know, we could get into a fight and the dog will, you know, hurt me, but I might win. Probably not. But, I could say a great white shark. Probably the shark's going to win because it's bigger than me. If I say a whale, if you get a tooled up whale wielding a battle axe, you know, I'm not going to win, am I? Because, well, it's massive. What, I mean, you know, unless I've got some, you know, clever dynamite gun. My name's Brody from Jaws, but, you know, other than that, this size is often the very most useful scale, because we can understand that the average human is about 60% size. So you can look at your monster and go like, it's 120 size, so it's double human size. Okay. And I look at Cthulhu and it's like size 3000 or whatever it is, I can't remember. Clearly that's beyond human scale. So I'm telling a different story. If I'm telling a story about a human-sized monster, that's kind of like your, I don't want to say low-level Cthulhu story, but it's a story that's much more human-centric. Whereas if we're dealing with something with size hundreds, thousands, it's a cosmic scale story, because that monster just appearing is going to wipe out a city. So it's more about the god's influence rather than its physical manifestation.
So let me flip the question around a bit and ask for a little bit of advice for keepers. If you're telling a individual horror story, like you've spoken about before, and you're using a creature, say like a single night gaunt, something that when you actually look at the statistics is not terribly dangerous, and you might be able to kill it with a shotgun or something like that, how can you make that convey that same sense of completely unknowable cosmic horror, that core experience of Call of Cthulhu that makes everything so terrifying?
Okay, so when you're dealing with, again, a night gaunt, which is relatively human scale monster, so you know that, well, once you've encountered one and you've got a shotgun, you know they might be killed by them. They become less horrific in a way. So you've got to play your monsters in Call of Cthulhu unlike monsters in most of the role-playing games. What is the primary purpose in Call of Cthulhu for a monster? As we've said, it's horror. It's not a combat opponent, which is what its primary role is in most of the role-playing games. So if you get your head, twist your head around and think about it not as a combat opponent, but as a source of horror, that then can open the floodgates for doing things slightly differently. So always go back to the idea that horror is about the unknown. We are most afraid of things we do not understand and do not know. Therefore, presenting the Night Gaunt as a knowable, it's a kind of a black-winged humanoid without a face, and they've got this kind of tail, and it's going to swoop down and punch you, is very not horrific. Yeah. So presenting it that you see something flying in the air, you can't quite work out what it is, something dark flying, following you, is already more interesting and more scary than me just putting the thing walking up to me. So showing it in short bursts. Don't reveal the whole thing at first. Let it build up. You can hear it's flap. Something's flapping its wings. You keep hearing these wings flapping. You keep hearing this kind of sound of like chalk, nails going down a chalkboard because it's scratching its claws on some brickwork or whatever. Let the sound, let the atmosphere build before you present it. And even when you present it, don't be saying it's a Night Gaunt because you've given it a name. Now it's not unknowable. It's a dark form. It's this dark winged form coming at you. That's all you need to say, and then say what it's doing. What are you doing? I'm running away. I'm shooting at it. What are you doing? It comes. There's 5 claws the size of rulers swipe at your face. What are you doing now? That's far more scary than me saying the Night Gaunt makes an attack roll on you. So it's about the language you use.
Do you have any advice for players who might have just come off a game with Yog-Sothoth and a grand unspeakable evil, and now want to tell a story using a creature like, say, Ithwaka, the Windwalker, but want to make them feel just as powerful? Is it fine to just scale up the power of whatever your unknowable evil is because they're unknowable?
I mean, you can do. I mean, it really comes down to the presentation. It comes down to how you present things. Now, each of the kind of mythos deities and great old ones have their own kind of auras and kind of sphere that they kind of embody in a sense. But that's still very malleable. But so presenting something like the Windwalker, which is all kind of about cold and ice and that kind of thing. So using that and building up slowly from that, building in the fact that the adventure takes place in summer, but every morning their car seems to be frozen and there's ice over the door and the windows. Why is that happening? Now it's a mystery. Why is that happening? And then kind of increasing out that when they go out to the mountain to talk to some chap who's seen something in the woods, they find that they find the whole shack completely frozen. The guy is and the guy is frozen solid too, or something. So you start presenting what it can do almost as part of the background, the texture to the scenario. So so changing up the kind of the presentation in a way kind of helps to kind of funnel the players down the right direction in terms of what they may be facing, without necessarily giving it all away straight away. Just piecemeal kind of dropping it in. Aspects of that monster. So Cthulhu, it's kind of there's a strange fishy smell where you go. There's some there's kind of like you keep seeing fish. You keep thinking she keep passing fish markets, and the fish eyes, dead fish eyes, just keep staring at you, and it like they're following you. It doesn't really matter that Cthulhu is not necessarily doing it, but the players are thinking about that, and maybe Cthulhu is. I don't know. You can do what you like in your games.
So to finish things off, then let me ask you one last question, so that we do get one definitive answer. I think that a lot of people who've dived in to the mythos before and tried to do power brackets or anything often end up with the 2 final candidates being Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth. Would you be able to give us a final definitive is everything outside the universe or everything within it's the more powerful one here?
Well, I mean, that is the unknowable tough question. So let's just think it out for a minute. Okay, Azathoth is asleep. When he wakes up, in theory, the universe is destroyed, maybe recreated. And so, you know, he's very powerful on that cosmic level. But that's pretty much all that we know. I mean, he may do many things other than that, but that's, you know, his dreams manifest. You know, one might argue that Nyarlathotep is a manifestation of Azathoth's dreams, you know, a physical embodiment of his unconscious mind in our world. So that's pretty powerful too. But Yog-Sothoth, I mean, Yog-Sothoth is, well, he's the gate and the key, and that means he is kind of beyond everything. He kind of exists between the dimensions. So, you know, are we saying that Azathoth only exists in this one dimension? Maybe not, but we know that Yog-Sothoth is about time as well as space, and so maybe Yog-Sothoth can just keep time jumping to avoid Azathoth, and it is kind of this endless battle between them of, you know, sleeping and waking gods, and somebody keep time jumping back and forwards to avoid Azathoth waking. You know, is that more powerful? Probably. Time travel, you know, is pretty powerful in that conceptual way. But you know, you can cause lots of problems with time travel, obviously, but that's a whole different conversation.